I'm so honored to have you here on the very first episode of On Influence and Impact.
I'm honored to be on your first episode.
And for those who don't know you, you are the CEO of Glassdoor. You joined the company in 2015 as their vice president and the GM of monetization. You were quickly grew into the chief operating officer role in 2018. And then in 2019, you took over the helm as CEO. And what I appreciate about you, or what I've heard so much about you, is that not just your career is really impressive, but you are someone who really is deeply invested in their own self-growth and ensuring that you evolve not just with the needs of the business in a really incredible way, but you evolve in a way that also meets the growing demands and desires of you and your life. So let's dive in and look at your leadership story. I often find so much of what makes us, you, me here today as leaders is really all that's happened in the past, right? The people, the events, the moments that really have shaped us into the leaders that we are today. And I'm curious, if you look in your past, what are some of those key moments or people that really have shaped who you are today as a leader?
Gosh, I mean, go back to so many people and moments of my career and even of my upbringing. I grew up in Australia where I was born, and I think back to my family was a kind of a working class household where my parents certainly instilled good values of kind of working hard and achievement orientation, but also this idea of that, joining a profession, getting a good education was the pinnacle of career success. And so that kind of shaped me early on of like wanting to do well in school, wanting to apply myself and achieve, but also looking to do well in my career. And that was defined more narrowly than I'd say later on, where I kind of my eyes opened to other things. But back then, being a lawyer or a doctor or those types of professions seemed good. And after high school, I ended up doing a university actuarial studies because I'd heard that being an actuary was a great profession. You earned well, and I was good at math, and so it could be applied. And so that was kind of my early upbringing. I ended up at Bain & Company, which is a management consulting company. And then that kind of opened my eyes to thinking more globally. It was a US-based company. So I came to the US with Bain and then also to do an MBA. And then I think at that point was an important juncture of being in the US, doing an MBA at Harvard, where I was meeting people from all different types of backgrounds and where I started meeting people who were working in tech. And that was really opened my eyes of like, you don't have to be in a profession to be doing things. And in many ways, when you're working in tech and being an entrepreneur, you can be doing some really exciting things. So that's kind of what led me into tech, and I went to LinkedIn and I guess along the way, I was talking to people and had some important conversations of what's going to help me do well in tech and kind of the mindset you need to bring of it's not just about being really smart, but it's also about taking risks. And I think that was a new perspective, which I hadn't really had earlier in my childhood. Also in my kind of not childhood, but more in my early career. And then also people telling me that getting into product management would be really important. So that was kind of what led me into product management at LinkedIn. And then I guess there's another really important career juncture for me was after 5 years in LinkedIn, having had a great run there, my wife and I, actually my fiance at the time, we decided, let's get married and let's take a year off. And it seemed like a scary thing. And I remember people telling me, oh, do you really do that? Taking a year break out of your career? Is this the right thing to do? But I'm really glad we did, because when I think back to a lot of my personal growth, I think that was a really important juncture for me. In the year off, we traveled a lot, but for both of us, we started thinking more about how we want to live our lives, other life skills that are really important. We started delving into meditation. That then opened up Buddhism. And so that became kind of a framework and philosophy for how I think about my spiritual growth. And then came back to the US after those travels with both, better perspective on what we want to do with our careers, but also I think, important set of growth that would then, be the building blocks for a lot of personal and spiritual growth that's happened since that time. And then, where you picked up was I joined Glassdoor back in 2015. So it was just after that, those travels, and I had a great run at Glassdoor. And I think, we can dive into it, but a lot of like the different points along my Glassdoor journey, I think a lot of the things that I worked on in the pre-Glassdoor years, but particularly that year off, was so pivotal in, in some of the decisions and some of the key junctures at Glassdoor.
I love it. And a lot of what I'm hearing there is like there was this natural inclination when you're younger and shaping to just be really driven, success, achievement oriented.
Yes.
And then there was this inflection point that happened where you went abroad for a year, where like it almost like you realized something much broader, much bigger, and then you came back into Glassdoor. And I'm curious, how did that affect your leadership and how you showed up for the company, for the people, for your team?
Yeah, I'd say that even today, there's still a big part of me that's still very ambitious and achievement oriented, but
doesn't go away, right?
It doesn't go away. And sometimes it gets in the way, but I think I'm better at noticing it today than I was 10 years ago and 10 years before that. So yes, certainly I'd say the earlier version of me was very achievement oriented and had blinkers on to that being the only thing that mattered. I think the year off helped. But even coming into my early years at Glassdoor, I was still very achievement oriented. And I'd say all the way up until the point of which I was given this great privilege and honor of being able to take over and run the company. I would say a lot of what kind of took me to that point was this kind of success and achievement orientation of, I still had this ambition of, I one day want to lead a company like Glassdoor. And I remember telling that to the founder, Robert Holmes, in my first meeting with him back in 2000. And it worked well because Robert was also at that time starting to think about what's his next steps and how can he one day have a successor that could take over the reins from him. And so that was fortuitous that we had that conversation. But I think it kind of gives you an insight into the type of person who I've been and still, in many ways still am. But I think, to your point of I've rounded it off with like a greater appreciation for other things that are important to me. And also, I think a real appreciation that this success and achievement orientation can be good up to a point, but it can also be a barrier to other things that are really important to your life and can certainly be a barrier to, your feeling of fulfillment and happiness. I think I didn't really have that insight until a few years ago and I think, another juncture was getting to like this, what seemed like the pinnacle at the time, which was getting to run Glassdoor and being the CEO of a company. It made me reorient and think, okay, well, what's next? And that process then began a whole nother, new cycle of growth and development for me.
And I see that all the time in my practice, right? Which is like, how do we think about this concept of integration versus this black and white thinking? The black and white being, okay, achievement oriented or spirituality. But I really feel like we show up as the best leaders when we create this deeper integration that embraces the gray between both of these.
100%. And I think that was probably I think I've improved as a leader. And you ask the people who work with me and know me best, they've seen a transformation in my leadership style since I took over as leader because of that realization of that integration, the importance of that integration. I think I was trying to show up as, if I could be the smartest guy in the room and make the best decisions, I will be the best leader. And I think the realization was, you can't lead unless you capture the hearts and minds of people, unless you build relationships with them. And the way to build relationships with them is, to get to know them, to connect with them. And that's what, for me, a lot of spirituality is that feeling of connection with others, seeing the oneness in all parts of your life. And that absolutely applies to, the company and the team you're working with as well. And it's certainly been a journey in the last few years, which, the realization is this, if I'm going to be CEO of Glassdoor, the skills and strengths that got me here aren't going to be sufficient for this next phase.
That's a lot of what I'd love for us to dive into now is exactly that point, right? We all reach a stage or a moment in our career where it's almost like the oh shit moment, where it's like, God, what got us here is no longer going to get us there. And it is an inflection point where we can either lean in and say, all right, how do we grow? How do we learn? How do we evolve? Or we can operate from a place of fear of reactivity. And I'm curious for you, it sounds like you have had that moment, but when was that moment, that pivotal moment where you realized that this isn't working and I've got to shift?
I'd say it was in 2021, and it was a year into COVID. And if at that point in time, I'd been CEO for just over a year, and I was wondering if I was doing a good enough job and if I was cut out to be in this role. For Glassdoor, the beginning of COVID was really tough on the business, where we make money when companies are recruiting on our platform. And when everybody kind of shut up shop for a handful of months, it was a scary time for us. And so we went through a transition where we restructured, we did a big round of layoffs, and just the mood of Glassdoor had shifted into, a very kind of, it just felt heavy leading the company. And then I really doubted my capabilities of, I just taken over as CEO, and I'd kind of taken us through this really kind of traumatic experience as a company. And was I up to this? It didn't feel fun. And then on my personal side, I was also starting to think more deeply about the relationships I had with other people in my life, and particularly my parents, and wanting to go there. And so I actually started to engage with, so I'd always had an exec and career coach, but I started in 2021 to engage with a therapist as well, which in the beginning was to talk about my relationship with my parents. And then it really expanded into just my relations with people in general, and kind of this starting to really understand yourself. And I think that's one of the brilliant things about therapy is when you look inwards, you start to know yourself better, and you get these insights on ways in which you are showing up. Many times, I think many of us just kind of sleepwalking through life, not aware, not having that self-awareness of how we show up to other people. And so that insight paired with thinking about what was going on in my personal life, with how I was showing up at work, there's at some point during 2021, there's a recommitment of trying to develop how I show up as a leader and how I show up in all aspects of my life in a new way, where, much more connecting oriented, much more relationship oriented, versus the other version of me, which didn't have an appreciation for how important that is if you want to be an effective leader, and if you want to have really great relationships with everybody which you interact with.
I've heard you mention how impactful or meaningful relationships now are to you. I'm curious, why do they matter so much to you?
Right now, my realization is that relationships and that feeling of connection with other people is core to happiness. And love, in however you broadly define it, that feeling of love and connection with people from all walks of aspects of your life is ultimately what makes you as an individual, so fulfilled and so happy. And without it, all the things you could have, all the achievements of the world, material things, and it's meaningless, and you won't be happy. And so I think I know that now in a much deeper way than I would have years ago. And I think if you had asked me 10 years ago, I don't think I could have articulated that. I think I would have appreciated that it's good to have relationships, but I would have put a lot more emphasis and weighting on my own kind of more of the ego side of what I needed to achieve, and who I was in the world mattered a lot more than my connection.
So bringing it back to that moment in 2021, and where there's an evolution in you, where you're starting to do therapy and doing the deeper work, what did you notice started to happen then within the business, and how you showed up in your role?
Over time, I noticed a shift in how people connected with me. I think sometimes, not that I was a tyrant in my previous self, but I think people felt safer with me. Whereas I think the sharper elbows seemed to be rounded off a little bit, and people felt like they could open up a little bit more to me without feeling of being judged. And that was a really positive thing.
And I can do that. That's a hard thing. I mean, that concept of safety, I think it's fundamental to creating intimacy, connection, but really high performing teams. And how did you do that, especially in 2021, where it's quite remote as it is now? But how do you create that safety?
I think for the people I interacted with most, I was pretty transparent around what was going on with me and what I found to be important. So my executive team, we would do offsites together, and we would have heart-to-hearts on what's going on. And I would talk to them about my desire to grow in this respect. And I think early on, people would have described me as like, I think you have some room to grow here. At the same time, I think, you're doing a good job. And certainly, you're not creating a hostile work environment by any stretch of the imagination. But then over time, I think, people were kind of like going, wow, like I've seen a difference. I've seen a shift in how you show up. And then I'd say the people who didn't have the direct contact with me, I think my reputation changed. I think for some people, there was an element of me being a little bit scary if you didn't know me, because I could be so serious. And I noticed that as a descriptor of me was mentioned less, and more often people saying how easygoing I was, or friendly I was, open. And so that was really nice to hear, as people started to shift in their impression of me, or new people would come into the business and have a different impression of me. But I'll admit it's something I need to keep working on, because I think there's also the default mode of when things get stressful, I know that where I can fall back into is like, all hands on deck problem solving mode to get people's feelings and maybe, I can ruffle feathers. And look, and I also think that like a little bit of that is totally fine from now and then.
Absolutely.
People, you do at times need to signal when things are serious and we need to get stuff done. But it's something, as I said, it's always a work in progress, and I think it's the self-awareness which is important.
So I'm hearing within there, if I can pull out, where it's like, one, how do you almost be really, especially with your own exec team, how do you be really clear with your intentions and communicate openly where you're wanting to grow and what you're looking to accomplish? Then I'm hearing too is the self-awareness and the clear of intentions of where you want to go, and like just practicing that each day. And three was, which I appreciate too, is this idea around, it's easy for us to show up in the most ideal way when we're smooth sailing, but when pressure comes in, that really is the moment of which requires the most practice or most attention. Does that resonate?
100%. I think when you are a person who is very achievement oriented, you can also be pretty hard on yourself. And I think the one thing that's also changed with this is that I'm trying to be a little easier on myself, so that when stressful times do happen and I don't show up the way I want to show up, I, give myself some grace as well, that, I'm not going to set myself the bar of being perfect all the time or only showing up the way I want to show up. There's plenty of times where I don't quite hit the mark, and that's okay. And I can let other people know that I didn't show up the way I wanted to show up. And also that, I try and lose less sleep over it. But the perfectionist side of me, which, historically would have been like, didn't achieve in showing up the way I wanted to show up. So the way you described it is spot on.
And what I love about what you just said too is it's that vulnerability of saying, like, I'm practicing not being so hard on myself, and I made a mistake here, but I'm not going to beat myself up. That creates the safety across teams too. It's like, if you're modeling that behavior, then your teams are also empowered to also share when they showed up well and when they didn't. Not saying they're not going to take ownership for improvement, but it's like, let's own it, let's recognize it, then let's not beat ourselves up, but then take the right actions and focus on what we can control.
The vulnerability is key. It's not a sign of weakness. It actually is a sign of strength. It builds trust, and then it really allows you to pull off things you just couldn't pull off if you were having to try and pose as a person who's always right or always, going to be on the mark, or as a person who can't, let their guard down. I think it ends up being really difficult to show up authentically, but also when you are wrong and you're the type of person who's always right, then all of a sudden it then creates question marks on your effectiveness of your leadership versus a person who's vulnerable and says, I'm not setting myself a standard of being right all the time. I'm setting myself a standard of trying to be open and be vulnerable. It ends up being a winning formula to being a leader.
And how do you get there? Because that's hard, right? Like, I talk to folks all the time around this shift from knowing it all or being in control to this vulnerability or rawness, and it's scary for a lot of folks. And I'm just curious if you've got ideas or ways in which, like, how do you begin that journey for other CEOs who are saying, I see this leap, this chasm from perfection and execution and control to greater vulnerability. How do they start taking the steps? What do you recommend for them?
It's a practice where the more you do it, the easier it gets. I mean, you can imagine if you have one offsite with your team, and in that offsite you demonstrate a high degree of vulnerability, it then just sets the tone. From that point onwards of your relationship with your team is forever changed. And then you also have a choice. You can go back after the offsite and go back into the office and be less vulnerable, be your old self. But I think you then also at that point, that juncture, have total permission from then on. Even if up until that point you've been a different person, I think if you show up with true vulnerability, and even in just one offsite, I think it can be the beginning of turning a new page. And I think it's a interesting and practical way for leaders to begin the practice. The cool thing about offsites is that you're in a new environment and you're kind of it's not business as usual. And so it allows a new way of you showing up. Another thing more on a very practical, tactical level is bring a facilitator like an exec coach or somebody who's artful and masterful at helping bring out vulnerability in people, they can also help set the tone that you want to create. I think back to many of these offsites I've done with my team have been these pivotal moments in which we've been really vulnerable with one another. And then we've walked away after that offsite and things have been different when we're back together in the normal usual environment and in team meetings. And then I'd say keep it going in team meetings, create space in team meetings for that to happen, whether it be at the beginning of a meeting where people talk about what's going on in their lives and they bring the good, the bad, and the ugly. You have create space for everything. I'd also say that there's inward work you can do as a leader as well, which will help you be more comfortable in showing up in that first occasion and being vulnerable. So it's probably the combo of the two. But again, it can all begin with one important interaction I believe can set the tone and reset the tone to the extent that you feel like you're not happy with how you show up with your team.
I often see the CEOs I work with, they're moving so fast, right? And everything needs to be efficient, results, go, go, go. But in a way, what you're saying with these offsites is how do you slow down to be able to speed up?
I've observed other teams and talked to other leaders and they're going through these machinations of trying to get to a decision. And the politics that kind of, means that a certain person has to posture this way or it doesn't really open up that way. A meeting or a decision that should be done in a handful of minutes takes multiple meetings and multiple weeks to get something done. And then even then, it's a still suboptimal, half-compromised position to manage the politics. And then I compare that to the way our team operates, where we are far more open and vulnerable with each other. It means that we can make decisions really quick. We can disagree and commit. People trust each other. They trust the other person's intent. So there's no worrying about the politics of it. And it just means that things go so much more quickly.
So why is that? Like, what steps
because of that pre-work we've done of like, I know you deep down, you're a good person. We may not see eye to eye on everything. We may see some parts of the world differently, but I know who you are and you know who I am. And so when we're having this discussion on this other thing right now, we don't play these stories in our head on like why you are taking a different point of view to me. I can see it for what it is and we can quickly get to a decision. And that's honestly how it plays out. I'm always really astounded at how quickly our team is able to align and get to answers on things. The vulnerability we all display with one another in those occasions just creates such strength in the team's relationship that I'm very confident we move much more quickly as a result of it.
Do you feel this translates just as well with high performers as it is newer or lower performing executives on your team? Does it translate to both?
It's always challenging when you have a lower performing executive in any team. You want to try and create an environment which can bring the best out of people and give people an opportunity to develop and learn and ultimately perform. But in any team, it's important the team feels like we are a team, we are high performing. So that means that at times you do have to make tough decisions too on if everybody in the team is showing up. I think for newer people, it's fantastic because it sets the tone. For any new person coming to an organization, they're looking and they come in as kind of a sponge to like, can I see like, what's the culture here? Are people open? Are people political? And then they will then develop how they show up based on what they see. Not to say it's comfortable for everybody. Some people come from other places and they have their own ideas of how they should operate and they might find this a bit strange. But more often than not, it's good to have that early interaction where they can see how the team operates. I know that's happening not just within just the executive team at Glassdoor, but I know other teams say that as well.
There's a ripple effect, right?
It's a total ripple effect. Where we talk about our company values, one of the company values we have is good people. And it's because people at Glassdoor really show up in a way which is compassionate and thoughtful and wanting to bring the best out of people. And I think we do a good job in recruiting and getting certain types of people who want to show up with that mentality. But I also think we do a really great job of making sure that culture lives, through. And so that when people join, they want to then bring that side of themselves to how they shop at Glassdoor. And it's just really reinforcing in a positive way. It's
so much more fun to operate in this way, right? It's like when you're connected, when you feel a sense of team, when you feel a sense of safety, you're not only performing so much better as a leader, but you're just like it's so much more fun and joyful, right?
Yeah, I think about the places I've worked at throughout my career, and when you want to work hard and you work those late nights, you want to be doing it when you feel like it's for both a purpose because you believe what the company's doing, but also the people you're working with, you feel connected to them and you want to be side by side with them late at night. And when it's not fun, or there are people who you really struggle with, you can't even bring your A game. You're just not even
Yeah.
motivated to bring your A game because it's not fun. So creating fun environments that people actually enjoy working is so key. That's what Glassdoor is all about as well. We want to shine a light on companies that are doing a great job at treating their employees really well and creating great environments, working environments, because we deep down believe those are the best companies to work for, and they will attract the best talent and they will retain the best talent. And what we also see is that they end up being the companies that outperform.
What's the wisdom here for people?
The wisdom that I've generated in understanding myself, understanding that, the true key to happiness is the relationships and the sense of connection and belonging you have with others. And that applies not just in your social or family life, but absolutely still applies to work as well. And then going a step further in that, as a leader, that's ultimately, I think, the secret of success is your ability to connect with others. At the end of the day, like, you ask people how they define leadership, and it's your ability to inspire others and take them in a direction. And that inspiration comes because people want to follow you.
So what's next for you then?
In the last couple of years, I've been looking outward in my spiritual and personal growth. In 2024, I said, this is going to be the year of community for me, where I really want to invest in relationships in the various communities in which I live in. So yes, the work community is one, but I was thinking of of young children and beginning to connect with the parents in that community, and that being really important to me. Family being really important to me, even though my parents both live in Australia, I wanted to spend more time in connecting with them. My wife also has parents who live overseas as well. And so that's been a theme that's been really important. And then also to continue spiritual growth on what really matters in life and what is truly the right way to live your life.
I always like to give people one tangible takeaway. Is there one best practice or one thing that you do that you're like, this makes me so effective as a leader?
A piece of advice I was given very early in my career was intention, not attachment. And I think it is about this point of marrying where this concept of being really effective at your work, but kind of doing it in a way in which it's not all about the anxiety of having to achieve a certain outcome. Anytime I find myself stressed about something, whether it be happening at work or any other part of my life, I just try to step back and continue to believe in the intention of what I want to get done, but trying to lower the feeling of attachment to the outcome.
So it almost is like the opportunities for change is between stimulus and response, right? And that it's that space between of pausing. It's just simply that awareness that allows you to say that it's separate from me. So I can still be so driven. I can notice fear, and then it's like, let that go, because I can only do what I can do. Any final words of wisdom or things you want to say or share to feel complete?
It's cool to get time to reflect on this, how I've grown as a person and changed as a leader over time. But I've enjoyed the conversation, enjoyed the chance for the introspection.
I think it's so important for people to see role models like yourself who are CEOs of a very successful company doing incredibly well, and to see that you can blend that leadership, that seniority, that authority with spirituality, with intention, with self-awareness. When we bring the two of those together, we can really do incredibly impactful, compassionate, crazy, successful achievements. Get it all done, but do it with a heart. So I just really appreciate you for embodying that. That really does all start with deeply investing in your own evolution so that you can both meet the needs of the business, but also the growing and shifting demands of your life too. So well done. And thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Amanda.
Oh. All right, Christian, thank you. We'll see you soon.